You've heard the legends, kings in armor, queens in towers, peasants bowing beneath the weight of God or grain or guild. But beneath the hymns and heraldry, beneath the sermons and swords, there was something else, something quieter, something forbidden. Tonight, we step into a Middle Ages that most history books dare not open. Not the wars, not the plagues, but the bedrooms, the whispered longings behind monastery walls, the strange, sacred rituals of desire, the cold beds of peasant girls, the velvet secrets of kings and queens. This is not the Middle Ages you learned in school. This is the one that stirred beneath the surface, the one that existed between the lines, in silences, in shadows, in stolen glances. So, lie back, let the candles burn low, let the noise of the modern world fall away, and let me tell you what sex, real, human, uncomfortable, tender sex was really like in the time of saints and swords. Welcome to a history they tried to forget, but that still breathes quietly in the dust. You are not a knight. You do not wear armor, nor do you feast in high halls, nor ride horses into battle under a banner bearing your family's crest. You are not a lady of the court, nor a merchant draped in foreign silks. You are, instead, a person of the land, a laborer, a weaver, a simple tanner in a medieval village that smells of wet earth and firewood smoke. You live where the wind slips through thatched rooftops, and the sky is something you read like scripture, searching for signs of rain, of plague, of seasons that pass and never ask your permission. Your day begins with the rooster's cry, not in comfort, not even with the expectation of choice, but as a ritual of survival. You stretch your back, aching from another night on a straw mattress, shared in the dark. Your home is not yours alone. It is filled with bodies, relatives, children, perhaps aging parents or cousins who have nowhere else to go. In many homes, the hearth never goes cold and someone is always stirring, even in the early hours. The walls are thin. The air is cold in winter, sticky in summer. Privacy is something imagined, not experienced. At night, you sleep close to warmth, to people, to animals. You may share your space with chickens or goats, especially in colder regions where the warmth of a living creature means one fewer log burned, one less coin spent. Sex in this life happens not in secret but in routine, quietly under coarse linen blankets, without words, without expectation. There is no place for passion here. What intimacy you have, if you have it, comes in flickers like firelight dancing on stone. If you are married, it is likely not for love. That is not a failing of the heart, merely the custom of the time. Marriages are contracts, agreements made for land, alliances, or survival. In the countryside, love is something reserved for songs, not real lives. You might meet your spouse for the first time at your wedding, or perhaps you've known them since childhood. Either way, the expectation is the same: to work the land, to bear children, and to fulfill the church's view of your sacred duties, one of which is sex. But sex is not yours to define. The church is watching, not directly, not always, but through a web of teachings, confessions, prohibitions, and fear. There are many days you are not allowed to lie with your spouse, even if you wish to. Sex is forbidden on Sundays, and Fridays, and during Lent, and Advent, and on the eve of a saint's feast day. It is also forbidden during pregnancy, during menstruation, during the 40 days following childbirth, on holy days of obligation, and on days of fasting. All told, well over half the calendar year is off limits. And so, intimacy becomes a thing of scheduling, of calculation. Some couples keep mental calendars. Others seek guidance from priests. Many simply abstain, fearful of unknowingly transgressing holy law. And if you do cross that line, if you act on desire during a forbidden time, or in a forbidden way, you confess. Quietly, behind a wooden screen, in the chill of a stone church, you kneel and speak your sins. The priest listens. He has read the penitentials, thick Latin texts that list in fine detail every sin imaginable, including those of the flesh. These manuals are precise, meticulous, clinical. They tell him how to assign penance for every act, every thought, every position deemed improper. For example, to lust after your spouse too eagerly may require fasting for 3 days. To lie with them during Lent, a week of penance. For other transgressions, the price is higher: a pilgrimage, public humiliation, or years of silent repentance. You are taught that sex is sacred only when it serves procreation. To seek pleasure for its own sake is to indulge the animal part of the self, the part that leads to hell. Some theologians, Saint Jerome, for instance, write that even a husband who desires his wife too passionately is guilty of a kind of adultery in spirit. Desire, even within marriage, is dangerous. The Church warns that the devil hides in moments of lust, that the serpent of Eden speaks not just to Eve, but through every act of untamed pleasure. There is only one position considered fully acceptable: husband above, wife beneath, in silence and solemnity. Anything else, from variations in posture to use of the mouth, is not just frowned upon, but feared. The idea that the body could feel joy outside its holy function is deeply unsettling to the medieval mind. Your body, after all, is a vessel for God's work, not your own fulfillment. And so, you learn to turn inward. You do not speak of what you want. You do not even have words for some of the things you might feel. You learn that dreaming too vividly is sinful, that touching yourself is shameful, that even your thoughts are subject to judgment. And over time, like the heavy smoke that settles into the beams of your house, shame becomes something permanent, a quiet presence, always watching, always reminding you that the body is weak and the soul must be vigilant. Outside the home, the scrutiny continues. Your neighbors notice everything. They notice when your belly begins to swell. They count the weeks. If it swells too soon after marriage, tongues wag. If no child comes after years, questions rise. Women, especially, bear the burden of this attention. Their bodies become public indicators of virtue or failure. A wife who fails to conceive may be blamed for a sin in her past life or for lacking proper modesty. Remedies range from prayers to herbal concoctions, sometimes potions brewed by midwives that skirt the line between medicine and magic. Adultery is not just a private betrayal, it is a communal offense. In some villages, adulterers are forced to stand in the town square, their heads shaved, clothed in rags that mark their shame. In cities, punishment may come in the form of fines, exile, or even public whipping. Men are punished, but women more often. Their bodies are seen as gateways to temptation, and therefore more dangerous. If a woman is assaulted, she may be blamed. If she desires, she is suspected. Honor, as it is understood, belongs not just to her but to her father, her husband, her family, and for those who do not desire in ways. The Church approves, for men who love men, for women who love women, for those whose desires fall. Outside the strict binary of sacred union, life can be dangerous. In some regions, homosexuality is punishable by death. In others, by castration, flogging, or permanent exile. There are stories, whispered or written in the margins of court documents, of lovers discovered and burned, buried alive, or vanished without a trace. Most, however, simply live in fear, loving in silence, hiding in plain sight. In larger towns and cities, sex becomes a commodity. Brothels exist, some tolerated, some regulated by local councils. The Church does not celebrate their presence, but allows them as a lesser evil. Better a man visit a harlot, one bishop writes, than seduce a virgin or defile a wife. Prostitutes are called necessary sin. Their presence, like sewage cisterns, is seen as a practical solution to a deeper problem. The women who work in brothels often wear specific clothing, belts, badges, or veils of certain colors, so they can be identified. They are denied church burial. They are taxed, sometimes protected, sometimes preyed upon. Their lives are short, their names forgotten. Still, not all is despair. In the quiet of everyday life, love sometimes finds a place to grow. There are stories, real ones, preserved in letters and diaries, of couples who share warmth and laughter, who sneak kisses beneath cloaks, who write tender notes across distances. There are husbands who miss their wives while away at war, who dream of the curve of her back, the sound of her voice, the way her hand fits his. There are wives who light candles for their husband's safe return, who sleep with his shirt beside them, who carry his child with pride. These moments are rare but real. They happen not in ballads but in kitchens, in barns, beside fires. They happen in the hush of winter nights when the rest of the world sleeps, and only do people remain awake listening to the quiet between heartbeats. Love in the Middle Ages is not grand. It is not easy. But sometimes it is present, tender, resilient, and stronger for the silence that surrounds it. By morning, all returns to routine. The coals are stirred, the bread is baked, the field calls. Your body rises, aches, and obeys. You do not question, you do not resist. Your body is not yours alone. It belongs to your spouse, to your church, to your children, to your station in life. Intimacy is not yours to claim. It is a duty, a task, sometimes a risk. And yet, sometimes, in the smallest of ways, sex becomes something else. A quiet rebellion, a flicker of warmth, a shared breath beneath wool. A moment that no one else will witness, no priest will hear, no neighbor will gossip about. Just the simple truth of two people, close for now. This is what it means to be a lover in the Middle Ages. Not heroic, not poetic, but real, awkward, regulated, and very rarely fun. And yet, not every story in the Middle Ages was lived in silence, or hidden beneath a peasant's roof. Some unfolded in castles, courts, and across kingdoms, scandalous, defiant, unforgettable. To understand the strange power of love, sex, and politics in the highest places, we must travel from the muddy paths of the village to the glittering guarded world of Eleanor of Aquitaine, queen, rebel, and lover of two kings. She was born not in darkness or poverty, but in light, sunlight, southern France. The Duchy of Aquitaine, vast, rich, and cultured, was unlike the cold stone fortresses of the north. Its air was scented with lavender and fig trees, and the songs of troubadours echoed through courtly halls. Eleanor was the daughter of Duke William X, a man whose court fostered poetry, learning, and what some would call dangerous ideas, romantic love, personal freedom, even women's voices. When her father died in 1137, Eleanor became the most eligible woman in Europe. She was only about 15, and yet, with his death, she inherited not only immense land, but also immense attention. Within weeks, her wardship and her hand were given to the King of France. Young Louis VII, pious and serious, had not expected to be king so soon, nor had he expected a wife like Eleanor. She was nothing like the northern ladies of court. She spoke her mind, rode horses astride, laughed in public. She enjoyed music, danced the company of poets. She had opinions, and perhaps most scandalous of all, she was not shy about expressing them. Louis, raised in the monastic ideal, was bewildered by her. Their marriage was awkward from the start, but it was not merely a clash of personalities. It was a clash of visions for womanhood, for kingship, for life itself. They traveled together on the Second Crusade. While Louis sought salvation in the Holy Land, Eleanor saw something else: opportunity, agency, risk, and ultimately, disappointment. Rumors began to swirl that she had grown too close to her uncle, Raymond of Poitiers, Prince of Antioch. Whether the rumors were true, we do not know. But they were enough. The French clergy whispered, the nobles gossiped, and Louis, already at odds with her, boldness began to withdraw. Their marriage, strained and childless for years, dissolved like parchment in the rain. When the annulment came, the church allowed it on the grounds of consanguinity, shared blood, but everyone knew better. Eleanor was too much for France, too much for a man who had once wanted to be a monk. And yet, she was far from retreating. Within mere weeks, 8, to be exact, Eleanor was remarried, this time to a man nearly a decade younger than her, a fiery young duke named Henry Plantagenet. Soon, he would become King Henry II of England, and Eleanor, once Queen of France, would be crowned Queen of England. To kings, to crowns, one woman. But marriage to Henry would prove no fairy tale. Their early years were passionate. Together, they ruled over an empire that stretched from the Scottish borders to the Pyrenees. She bore him sons, many sons and daughters too. She advised him, travelled with him, held her own court in Poitiers. There, in the court of love she fostered, the rules of chivalry and courtly affection were refined. Women, for once, were not just recipients of poetry, they were judges. They debated the ethics of love, the duties of lovers, the limits of passion. It was playful, yes, but also radical. It suggested that a woman's voice mattered, that her pleasure, even her power, deserved a place in court. But as time wore on, Henry grew restless and cruel. He took mistresses, most famously Rosamund Clifford, the fair Rosamund whom Eleanor allegedly loathed. Some stories even in her own lifetime claimed she poisoned her. More likely, she merely endured. Eleanor was not without flaws, but she was patient, and she was watching. When her sons, now grown and hungry for power, rebelled against Henry in 1173, Eleanor supported them, whether she encouraged the revolt or merely tolerated it. History debates. What is known is that when the rebellion failed, Henry had her arrested, his queen, confined to stone castles in England for 15 years, moved from one manor to another, rarely allowed letters, rarely allowed visitors. She vanished from public life, imprisoned not for treason, but for defiance. 15 years? Think of that. Not as a queen, but as a prisoner in palaces. No court to guide, no books to publish, no politics to shape, just silence, just waiting. And yet, she did not break. When Henry died in 1189, her son Richard, now King Richard the Lionheart, freed her. She emerged not as a relic, but as a force. She helped rule the realm in his absence. She arranged diplomatic marriages, including that of her granddaughters to future emperors. She traveled across mountains in her 70s to rescue her family. She outlived all but 2 of her 10 children. She died in a monastery, not in sorrow, but in peace. What made Eleanor remarkable was not just her boldness. It was her endurance, her ability to survive in a world that did not know what to do with a woman like her. She was both revered and reviled, called a whore by some, a saint by others, a temptress, a queen, a mother, a traitor, a patron of poets, a builder of courts. And yet, when we speak of medieval women, we rarely begin with Eleanor. Perhaps she is too complicated, too worldly, too sexual, too political. She did not fit the mold of martyr or nun. She did not live in the shadows. She was the spotlight itself. If the Middle Ages often felt like a cage for women, Eleanor rattled the bars. She loved and married and remarried. She ruled. She rebelled. She endured. Her letters are lost, but her actions remain. They ripple through the chronicles. They whisper through the stained glass windows of abbeys she founded. They dance in the songs of troubadours who immortalized her court. And in the quiet of evening, when the world stills and stories drift like smoke across the centuries, her name is still spoken. Not as myth, but as memory. Not as legend, but as a woman who lived, a woman who loved deeply, ruled fiercely, and never, ever disappeared. She reminds us that even in a world that tried to define womanhood through silence, obedience, and invisibility, there were those who refused. Eleanor refused. And because she did, the story of love, power, and scandal in the Middle Ages is not just that of kings. It is also hers. The story of Eleanor reminds us that even within the corridors of power, love and desire could defy convention. But not all women were queens. Not all had crowns or castles or sons to rebel on their behalf. Many were born into quieter destinies, not by choice but by custom, duty, or convenience. And many were placed or placed themselves behind stone walls, cloisters, convents, places where the noise of the world was supposed to fall silent, where women became brides of Christ, where desire, so the world believed, would vanish. But desire does not vanish, it changes form. Let us walk now, quietly, as one must, through the worn wooden gates of a Benedictine nunnery in the 12th century. The outside world is still near. The bells of a nearby village, the sound of cattle on the road, the flicker of wind against the thatched chapel roof. But inside, everything slows. The rules are strict. The hours are marked by prayer. The body is covered, head to toe, modest, layered. The voice is measured, the gestures modest, the gaze lowered. You rise before the sun. Matins. Your first prayers in the chill of the chapel. There is no fire here, only breath and candlelight. Your fingers are cold, your thoughts fogged. You do not speak unless spoken to. Meals are taken in silence with readings from scripture. You work in the gardens, or in the scriptorium, or washing linens in the cold stone basin. You sleep on a hard wooden plank, with a woolen blanket and no pillow. At Compline, the final prayer, you ask forgiveness for thoughts you cannot name aloud. Some of the sisters are here because of devotion, some because their families could not afford to marry them off. Some were widowed, others disgraced. Some are daughters of nobility, sent to the convent not as punishment, but as promotion to secure spiritual favor for the family, to maintain political neutrality. Some were placed here before they could even speak oblates, raised not knowing any world outside these walls, and among them, desire stirs, not always sexual, not always even romantic. Sometimes it is simply longing, to be touched, to be known, to hear your name spoken with softness, to feel that your body is more than a garment of sin. Sometimes, in the dim light of the vestry, a hand lingers longer on your shoulder. A glance is exchanged that holds something forbidden. A letter, folded and slipped beneath a book. A gift, a braid of hair, a carved token, a line of poetry copied carefully in the margins of a prayer book. In some cases, this intimacy grows. The historical records are cautious the church kept such things quiet, but the evidence exists, faint but persistent. In visitation records, bishops complain of undue affection between sisters. In penitentials, specific punishments are listed for embracing another woman carnally, or lying with a sister in the bed of warmth. One 12th century rulebook warns against soft caresses that lead the soul astray, and in the writings of the nuns themselves, we find traces. Take, for instance, the letters of Heloise. Before she was an abbess, she was a brilliant student, a scholar, a lover. Her letters to Peter Abelard, philosopher, teacher, and secret husband remain some of the most passionate writings of the medieval era. After their affair ended in tragedy, he was castrated. She entered the convent. Heloise continued to write to him from the cloister, and her words are fire wrapped in parchment. She speaks of love not as sin, but as memory. She mourns the loss of their physical union not because it was wrong, but because it was real. Even as abbess, she does not pretend to have forgotten desire. She names it, she holds it, she does not banish it. In doing so, she offers a rare glimpse into the internal world of a woman caught between spiritual obedience and human memory. But Heloise was exceptional. Most nuns wrote little, or what they wrote was not preserved. Still, some clues remain. In illuminated manuscripts, margins contain small hearts pierced by arrows. In inventories, gifts exchanged between sisters, rings, small sculptures. Embroidered cloth speak to bonds that went beyond mere companionship. Not all of these relationships were sexual. Some were deeply emotional, like spiritual marriages. Others may have included moments of touch, of longing fulfilled in fleeting ways. Most likely existed in that space the church feared most, the undefined, the ambiguous, the place where friendship shades into something else. And what of the male church? It responded as expected with regulation. Canon law forbade particular friendships. Nuns were not to sleep to a bed, nor to whisper after dark. Convents were visited by bishops, sometimes harshly. In extreme cases, nuns were punished, confined to solitary prayer, publicly shamed or expelled. But more often, it was simply suppressed, ignored, because to acknowledge desire in the cloister was to admit that the vow of chastity could not erase the body. Outside the convent, the world fantasized. In popular tales and songs, nuns became figures of erotic intrigue, sneaking out at night, meeting lovers in gardens, hiding sins beneath habits. These stories, while exaggerated, reveal something deeper, a cultural awareness that even the holiest women were not beyond longing. That walls, no matter how thick, could not mute the heart. But inside, life continued, a rhythm, a silence, a deep, enduring loneliness. One 14th century nun writes in her diary that she misses laughter. Another confesses, "There are days when I long to be held, even by a hand I do not love." A third simply describes a dream, walking barefoot through the snow, holding another sister's hand and feeling, for the first time in years, warm. Desire in the convent did not shout, it whispered, and yet it persisted, because the cloister was not a death of the self, it was a rearrangement, and for some, it was even a space of freedom. A surprising number of medieval nuns were literate. They read the Psalms, they copied manuscripts, they composed music. Some wrote visions, ecstatic, sensual, apocalyptic. Hildegard of Bingen, perhaps the most famous of all, wrote of divine love as fire in the veins. Her visions swirl with bodily metaphor, tongues of flame, rivers of milk, gardens of longing. She was not ashamed. She wrote what she saw, what she felt, and a church miraculously approved. Other nuns composed plays, poems, even treatises on theology. Within the walls of the convent, they found space not for rebellion perhaps, but for expression. Away from marriage, away from childbirth, away from the constant watch of fathers and husbands. The cloister could be, paradoxically, both prison and refuge. And in that tension, desire did not vanish. It evolved. There is a kind of love that survives in silence, a kind that endures without consummation, a kind that burns low but steady. Among the pages of forgotten breviaries and the hidden folds of linen veils, that kind of love was written, not with ink, but with attention, with time, with the simple act of staying. By night, the sisters returned to prayer, the chapel, dimly lit, the floor worn smooth by centuries of kneeling. A hymn begins, soft, unhurried, and somewhere in the second row, a hand brushes another, just briefly. Not to seduce, not even to comfort, but to remember, you are not alone. In the world outside, time moves quickly, but here, in the sacred hush of stone and song, it moves slowly. Slowly enough that a glance can last a lifetime. Slowly enough that a sigh can be a form of devotion. The convent was never empty of desire. It was filled with it. It simply spoke in a different tongue. If the convent offered silence and stone, the castle offered velvet and wine. If nuns whispered their longing in prayer, noblemen and noblewomen cloaked their desires in protocol, ritual, and silk-draped secrecy. And where peasants obeyed the body as duty and the church preached restraint as salvation, the elite often lived by different rules, or at least they pretended to. Let us now walk slowly through the arched corridor of a noble household, perhaps in Burgundy, or Gascony, or a Saxon keep carved into a hillside. The air is warmer here, perfumed. Candles flicker in silver sconces. Floors are swept and tapestries hang heavy with scenes from scripture or from myth. Courtiers move in soft leather shoes. Pages carry messages in linen and wine. And behind every curtain, stories unfold. Sex for the medieval elite was both spectacle and strategy. It began with marriage, not for love, rarely for love, but for land, for alliance, for legacy. A duke's daughter might be betrothed at birth, sent off at 13 and bedded before her hips had settled. A prince might take 3 wives in a lifetime, burying each with ceremony, replacing her with another duchy. Virginity was currency and fertility was obligation. But behind the chapel vows and ceremonial bedsheets, a second world pulsed beneath the velvet. Mistresses were common, expected, sometimes even formalized. Kings had them, dukes had them, bishops had them, and while the church frowned, it did not always resist. A powerful man's appetite was often tolerated, so long as it did not challenge the church's purse or pride. And what of the women? They to learn the game. Noble women were not passive dolls. Many wielded influence through seduction or alliance, or quietly orchestrated liaisons that protected their family interests. Some loved sincerely. Others played the role expected of them with grace, calculation, or subtle rebellion. Take, for instance, Isabeau of Bavaria, Queen of France in the 14th century. She was painted as scandalous, but the records are muddy. Rumors surrounded her, affairs, extravagance, secret pacts. Was it true? No one can say for sure. But what's clear is this: she understood court politics. She understood performance. And in a time when a woman's body was often more useful than her voice, she wielded both with precision. The bedchamber of the elite was not merely a place of pleasure. It was also a stage. Ceremonial bedding rituals, complete with witnesses, in short marriages were consummated. Royal sheets were sometimes inspected, and yet the same courts that demanded virtue delighted in courtly love, a literary and social game of flirtation, longing, and coded gestures. A knight might pledge himself to a lady he could never touch. A lady might offer her token, a scarf, a ring, to be worn in battle. Courtly love, unlike marital love, allowed for yearning. It gave form to unconsummated desire. It was poetry, stylized, controlled, intoxicating. But not all was poetry. In the shadows of palaces, darker stories lived. Noblemen, drunk with power, took what they wanted. Servants, maids, pages. Consent was murky when your life depended on obedience. The chronicles rarely recalled the aftermath, but hints remain. Wards sent away, donations to convents, quiet dowries, children born with no father's name. And yet, for all the secrecy, sex in noble households was strangely visible. Bedchambers were not always private. A noble couple might share a room with attendants sleeping nearby. Personal servants dressed and undressed their lords. Even kings bathed under the eyes of trusted companions. Privacy, as we know it today, did not exist, nor did sexuality follow only one path. Among the elite, especially in Renaissance courts, we find occasional glimpses of same-sex desire, usually whispered, often condemned, but not entirely erased. Letters between knights, poems exchanged between women, charges of sodomy brought against political enemies, sometimes true, often fabricated. But beneath the accusations, a deeper truth. The body refused to conform to the church's map. One of the most infamous cases comes from 15th century Florence, where young noblemen were frequently investigated for engaging in homosexual acts. The officers of the night, a special moral police, tracked rumors and testimonies. Some were punished, others protected by their families. It was a dance between desire and discretion, law and privilege, and all the while the church watched. It preached chastity but blessed royal marriages. It condemned lust but sold indulgences. It wrote volumes on proper positions, but turned a blind eye when a prince took his cousin's wife. The hypocrisy was not hidden, it was ritualized, sanctified, wrapped in gold leaf and incense. But sex in elite circles was more than act. It was a symbol, a transaction, a performance. The queen bore an heir, the kingdom rejoiced. A mistress died in childbirth, the court wept and replaced her within weeks. A young squire caught in bed with a lady, a scandal, a poem, a duel, a punishment. And through it all, the garments remained elaborate. Corsets and laces, tunics and furs. A noblewoman might be sewn into her gown. A lord might spend an hour unbuckling his armor, only to fall asleep drunk before reaching the skin beneath. Clothing itself was a form of foreplay, a negotiation between appearance and intention. But beyond the performance, beyond the rules and rituals, some found something real. Letters remain. Real letters between kings and lovers, between widowed duchesses and secret companions, between wives and husbands separated by war. They speak not of duty, but of missing someone's scent, the sound of their laugh, the way their hair curled at the nape. Not passion, not fire, just warmth. And sometimes that was enough. In the elite world, desire could be dangerous, but it could also be safe for a moment, behind the heavy curtains, beneath the carved ceilings, by the crackle of a private hearth. Because for all the spectacle, the politics, the silk and silver, love was still love. Hunger was still hunger. The human heart, no matter how rich the hands that held it, still beat in longing. By the time the banquet ended, and the goblets were drained, and the musicians dismissed, what remained in the chamber was often no different than what remained in the village, to people reaching for something more than survival. Sometimes they found it, sometimes they didn't. But in the quiet that followed, as the castle settled, as the fire dimmed, as footsteps faded down the stone corridor, even the elite dreamed. And in their dreams, like in ours, the body was not noble, nor sinful, just human. And now, the candles have gone out, the cloister is still, the castle quiet, the village asleep beneath its blanket of fog. The stories of hunger, of power, of loneliness, of love, drift like incense through memory. You've walked the muddy path with the peasant girl, sat behind stone walls with the dreaming nun, listened to secrets in the royal chamber, felt, for a moment, the ache of a world not so different from ours. because even in an age of iron and fire, people still longed to be seen, to be touched, to be wanted, to be more than just a name in a ledger or a body in a bed. And in that longing, they were painfully, beautifully human. So close your eyes now, let the echoes fade, let the flicker of history settle into silence. You've journeyed far enough for tonight. Sleep well. You are not alone. You never were.